the VR Writers' Room, I'm going to give you a brief history on why we do this, and that is primarily because innovation always comes from outside expertise. There is the stuff we know, there is the stuff we don't know, and then there's the stuff we don't know that we don't know it. And this is the purpose and the meaning of the VR Writers' Room and why we do it. Today, in this session, we have a whole array of wonderful people on this stage, but primarily we are covering off 4 key areas, which include games, film, opera, and digital out-of-home entertainment. So, starting on the far end, I will introduce to you our esteemed, I'm not going to say experts, I'm going to say specialists. We have Kevin Williams, who is our specialist today in digital out-of-home. Next to him, we have the lovely Rob Yescombe, who will be acting as our games narrative designer, almost the
Guy.
Specialist.
Guy. I'll take Guy.
Alongside him, hold on a minute, why are you two sitting together? We need to separate you, darn it. We have Simon Barratt from Barratt, who is also from the games industry. So these two will happily disagree with each other, hopefully. Then next to them we have the lovely Resh from Framestore, who you heard earlier on in the day speaking. Our lovely expert in all things special effects, visual effects, and other such wonderful things. Then we have Tom from the Royal Opera House with us. And then on this end, we have Kim, who is our multi-BAFTA nominated filmmaker on this stage. So that gives you the full lineup of who's on the stage today. Why we do this in the format of the VR Writers' Room is to basically bring together a bunch of experts in their own respective field. Yes, I'm using the E word. To create what we would call a naive expert. What does that mean? It means that it's a group of people who have a lot of good opinions about their own respective industries, but when it comes to the topic in hand, they are not necessarily an expert. So, that is the reason why we throw them all together. So, the VR Writers' Room was a piece of research that was carried out last year. We looked at the future of creative and narrative design for the immersive entertainment formats. We did this by breaking it down into 4 key sectors, or pillars of research, because quite frankly we didn't have enough time to do any more than that. Those were audience, world building, technology and technique, and narrative respectively. And what we're going to do today is talk through some of those findings and have our lovely esteemed panel discuss those things. So first up, by the way guys, can you all see this monitor down here?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah. Sort of.
Okay. It's kind of angled the wrong way for you guys. So, we're going to start off with audience. Now, previously, when we were talking about audience, there was a few different questions that came up. I would say because we only have half an hour, there's no way we're going to get through all of this. So, I'm going to throw the first question to Resh.
I knew that.
You get to choose. It's like Blockbuster. Choose a topic.
I think I'll
Choose
take
a topic.
No.
Which one would you like to go with first?
Oh, God. Giving mental breaks and transition in space. Just pick that one.
Okay, so giving mental breaks and transition space. Now, this was a topic that was raised because at the time we were looking at this idea that thrusting somebody directly into an immersive environment was somewhat jarring psychologically, especially if the audience is a younger user. So anybody under the age of 13, for example, it's quite a significant shift when they enter into the environment. Now, I know that over the last year or so, there's been a lot of development and a lot of exploration in different types of transition processes. So, first of all, in terms of the experiences that you have already created, has this been something that you've been looking at in terms of how do we transition people between those different experiences or the different stages of experience? And what have you found to be the most effective solution?
Yeah, we address this every time. It's a kind of a daily issue, regardless of what headset we're using. When we're creating an experience, what we're trying to do is not force the story onto the user. And I think often that's the mistake, is that we feel that everything has to be rushed. What we're finding that is actually we need to take a little bit more time. We need to allow people to almost ground themselves to where they are, take time to look around, and then have an understanding of what is expected of them, or then what story is being presented. And we found that with all of the experiences that we've done. We recently done an experience with the Hawaii Tourism Board where you're paragliding over the Hawaiian Islands. It's in vibe, really immersive, and then you get to kind of choose one of 4 islands that you can kind of paraglide down to and have a real-world experience. And what we found is we kind of put people up, and we were playing around with timing how long they would spend up there. More and more we tested it. People just enjoyed paragliding around. They really enjoyed the motion of kind of free-flowing around and having that freedom of movement. And when we tried to rush them, because we would trigger a dive down, they were like, whoa, no, what are you doing? So I think we're still figuring it out, because we're still trying to learn, we're still trying to create the grammar of what VR is and the language and what it means when you're in a space, a small space, a large space, what it means around the story. And I think the trick is that no one quite knows. We're all kind of learning, we're all kind of being mavericks and learning as we go along. And the best way is to try it, prototype, and see how it makes you feel. And the moment something feels off, the moment it breaks presence, then change what you're doing.
Okay, so I'm curious then, Kevin, to hear from your perspective. Given that in out of home and with theme parks, there's obviously this whole section of the process that is about transitioning people between that wait time and actually getting into the experience. So from your perspective, in terms of what out of home have been doing and what theme parks have been doing with these ride experiences and these immersive experiences, what have been the solutions that you guys have been kind of playing with for the last few years?
Well, we have a requirement for the 3-minute experience. On average, the gameplay, the experience that we're offering fits within that magic time period. We also have to deal with the queue line, the loading, the experience, and the unloading. So that really does put pressure on us to make sure that the person puts the equipment on, is engaged in the experience, understands it. As Nolan Bushnell said, easy to play but difficult to master the game experience should be, and even more so, it should be easy to understand for a large audience that it may not even be familiar with virtual reality. From our point of view, narrative has always been king. Quality of that narrative and the simplicity to get involved in that. And one of the other things that we've noticed, which would deal with one of the other points there, is the fatigue and the issues of sim sickness. From the research we did when I was with Walt Disney Imagineering, and what we've done subsequent to that is we've noticed that 3 minutes is usually the magic time that most people who are being dropped into a virtual environment feel comfortable. After that time, if the narrative isn't engaging enough, then they'll start to feel uncomfortable and fatigued. We try and stick within that boundary, and most of the arcade experiences in the VR arcade sector, or most of the theme park attractions that you see in the VR park sector, fall within that regime.
Okay, so you are kind of transitioning onto the preparing for VR fatigue and providing sanctuaries piece, which is kind of interesting because in the games industry, this is something that we've been doing for an awfully long time. If you play Resident Evil, then you know that you get your little respite, your little break when you get into that little safe room, and you can, change your inventory out, and hopefully nothing is going to jump out at you in that particular room, because that's the whole point of that particular room. And it's quite interesting because there are a lot of people who are currently developing what can only be described as horror experiences in VR. And one of the questions that was asked, and why this kind of became one of the outputs, was whether or not there should be safety within these types of experiences. Because, quite frankly, I don't know how many of you, show of hands, who's tried Resident Evil in VR? Who was a little bit uncomfortable or maybe minorly scared? You can own up to it, it's good.
Play alone in that.
My point being is that actually these experiences can be quite traumatizing, and especially if you don't give somebody good context as to what's happening. Another example of this is things like domestic violence or any other type of trigger experience where the actual content is something that's likely to trigger somebody, and we need to be able to provide them with a safe environment, a safe sanctuary that they can always fall back to and that they know how to get there. So I'm curious from your experience, Robert, in terms of the game development process and the reasons why you would place sanctuaries in specific places, what your kind of experience has been in relation to creating immersive experiences where there isn't that need for sanctuary.
It's a tricky one, because on the one hand, as an industry, we must be sympathetic to people's resistance or energy in the virtual environment. But as a person working in narrative, I don't particularly want to be sympathetic to it. I want people to suffer.
Rob doesn't have any issues with God complex, just saying.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not about me making them suffer. It's that one of the best things about VR is that you can be plunged into something in a way that you can't in other ways. And onboarding is an important factor. And of course, I think this is separate from the theme park stuff, where of course you do have to be, you have to be gentle with people. But in the area that I work in at the moment, there's predominantly stuff on the Oculus and the Vive, where basically, currently the market is 100% hardcore gamers. And they're looking for something that's going to blow their socks off. So yeah, I don't particularly want to apply those techniques yet.
Yet.
What's
But
also
what about when
interesting
the
sort of-
mainstream audience gets there, though? Just out of interest.
Well, I think...
It's 100% anyway, really.
What?
It's not 100%. It's 100% VR enthusiasts. It's not 100% hardcore gamers.
Well, in fairness, I don't have the data to hand, but I think anecdotally, at least that's my experience of it. But certainly they are, they're looking for something that makes that purchase feel bone-shatteringly worthwhile. And that's not about the content itself in bone-shattering. I just mean something that really is remarkable. Because I had an interesting experience. Has anybody here played Arizona Sunshine? So Arizona Sunshine is a game on the Oculus and the Vive, which is a fairly sort of traditional linear video game where you shoot zombies, and it has a nice little sort of story to it, and it's good and it's atmospheric. It's a great production. I played it all the way through the first time that I bought it. I think it's like 3.5, 4 hours. Really enjoyed it, but was heartbroken at the end of it. Because at the end, the experience that I'd had was a video game. And what's fascinating about VR is that it is a space in which art can still happen. And I say this as a person who's been working in video games for 12 years. I think that art can still happen in video games. Doesn't always. Doesn't have to necessarily, but it can. And so applying those techniques that we've been using in games for the last 30 years, I feel almost a bit disappointed at the idea of doing that.
Okay, fair enough. But having said that, from your perspective, Tom, utilising some of these techniques in what you do from a Royal Opera House perspective, obviously you normally transition between different acts in your content. Do you see this as something that would be valuable from an opera perspective as you are creating immersive opera experiences to want to have that transitionary or sanctuary space for somebody to be able to maybe take a step out?
Well, one thing we're not going to be doing is putting a full-length opera into VR. That's up to 4.5, 5 hours.
It's an endurance test.
Yeah, it would be an endurance test. I think for us, we're at that point where do we go down the route of creating content that is sort of serving the art, or do we create art itself? And I think we're at that point where we're really excited about what it would be like to create operas and ballets for VR and AR. I think that's on the horizon for us. But we're absolutely adamant that that isn't going to be a shared collective experience, people sitting down in a theatre and letting it hit them. That is amazing, and we do that in our theatre every night, 6 days a week. VR isn't the right platform for that. And I'm really reticent that it would ever become a long-form platform for engagement.
I think that's actually a very good point in relation to games as well, because we're at this juncture where we're starting to see what consumer expectation is for a product you're selling on Steam as a game. How many hours should it be is a question that's starting to be asked, and that again is to me a hugely disappointing question to be being asked of VR at this point.
Well, we've had an example of a horror VR experience just reopen recently with the Darren Brown Ghost Train experience. And that's mixing all of the traditional approaches of people in suits, playing with the lights, physical effects, as well as VR. And it's the subtlety of that VR experience that is opening a lot of people's minds in the theme park industry who already have the horror ride experiences.
Yeah.
I think that's true. But this is just talking about games, and it was interesting to hear you talking about opera because there is an understanding that I pay $60 and this game will last 7 to 10 hours, or the price of an opera ticket. Forgive me, I don't know, but I think there's an expectation. Yeah, exactly right. But there's an expectation on what that is worth in unit of time.
Yeah.
Well, I feel that's something we've got to try and get away from.
I don't think we could ever monetize our work in that area. It's about audience engagement for us. I think it would be really quite foolish for an arts organisation to think it can monetize VR experiences in that way, similar to I bet Warner Brothers didn't think they could monetize Fantastic Beasts. maybe they did, but I'd maybe query that. I think it's down to brevity, and I think we're getting a lot of consultation with the theme park world at the moment, because we feel that actually wrapping the whole VR into a bigger piece of theatre, because that's what we do theatre. You know, the whole act of putting the headset on is part of the show. For us, that's where we think the future is.
And again, I think this is really an interesting point, because a lot of people tend to miss this, especially when you look at people like The Void or Dreamscape or Zero Latency or any of these other kind of, I'm going to call them Laser Quest 2.0s. They're going to say something different.
Scale and multi-user entertainment experience.
Yes. Thank you for the official title,
Yeah,
Kevin.
no, go on.
But certainly a lot of those types of experiences is very much about staying within the headset. And there is this interesting kind of misconnection, if you like, between the physicality of theatre and immersive theatre, where there's really a missed opportunity. And I'm very interested to see who gets there first and who understands how to really fuse those things together. But also, part of the questions that we had here, and I think this is a very natural question to move on to, is actually the idea of setting the benchmark and expectations for the audience, because that comes a long way to defining the expectation of what the format is. So, for example, if somebody's coming at this from a game-centric view and saying, you know, I want this game to last however many hours, I expect to be able to shoot shit or whatever the thing is, versus somebody coming at it from an opera or theatre perspective, saying, you know what, I expect to sit back and be able to consume this entertainment and have this entertainment come at me, you know, rather than necessarily have deep interaction with that content. Because let's be honest as well, the thing with immersive content at the moment is there is a spectrum of interactivity. And when we go from 360 film all the way through to VR gaming, there is a spectrum of that interaction. And there is this, you know, confusion for a lot of people at the moment about, well, you know, if you can't interact, it's not really VR. And you know, it's like, guys, there is such a thing as 360, and that is on the spectrum here. So we have to kind of accept and understand that. But what isn't happening at the moment is there doesn't seem to be a way to identify for the audience what the expectation should be and what that benchmark is in terms of, this is what good looks like, and this is what good game VR content looks like, this is what good 360 VR content looks like, and this is what good theme park, you know, or immersive content looks like. And I'm curious from your perspective, Kim, from a filmmaker's perspective, let's just take this purely from filmmaking, because there's so much to talk about here. In terms of that setting the expectation for the audience, what do you think is kind of the core benchmark that we should be looking at from a cinematic and a film VR perspective?
That's a loaded question.
You knew I was going to do this.
I knew it. Basically, it's like anything. When you're about to tell a story or any kind of narrative, you got to figure out what it is you want your audience to feel, the pace in which you want them to feel, and again, the sad part of reality, the timeline you have to make this thing happen. Then you have to decide. I usually sit down and decide, where are they going to see this? Is it going to be a fully immersive where they get to walk around room scale and an Oculus, or is it a 360 experience? And then I can decide from there to tailor it and make it work to what it is. I think right now we have this beautiful opportunity with the audience that a lot of people haven't used it, and they put it on no matter, I've given them stuff that's so sorry to say, but shit. It's like the dev standard where we've just done a quick render or thrown something together just to see the reaction, to see if they looked where we want them to look, or if they got the right experience, or they're understanding what we're trying to say. And they're like, oh my God, this is amazing. And I'm like, it's not done. And then you're like, okay, I still got 2 months to produce this. Do I put that 2 months of how the level is? And the reaction is usually quite close. So I find it's a really tricky situation to set a benchmark. I think the benchmark is for the person making it.
Okay. So moving on, because we're never going to get through all of this, so I'm going to try and move us on to world building. So I am going to start with Kevin, because you're probably the person on this particular lineup who's had the most experience from a transmedia or cross-platform storytelling perspective. And so, therefore, I would be interested to hear from your perspective, especially when we're talking about franchise content in theme park and out-of-home environments, the importance of being able to kind of expand upon that franchise universe and expand upon the detail of that world. without it feeling like you're overstretching the franchise, because that is an issue that you guys have been dealing with for an awfully long time in terms of, whether it's the Terminator ride or whatever the thing may be, whichever theme park, whether it's Universal or whoever, is just how much of the world do you really need to bring into the physicality of the theme park experience in order for it to still feel genuine?
Well, I don't know how many of you were lucky enough to hear the excellent presentation from Framestore, and they charted quite clearly how, from a promotional application, you're taking a very high quality IP, intellectual property, such as the Harry Potter universe, and turning that into an experience. We also have the same problem with the theme park experiences. I've mentioned Darren Brown, but we can look at some of the new roller coaster VR experiences where they are trying to inject the Avengers experience into a roller coaster VR experience. I'm a little controversial here. I don't work in the VR industry. I don't work in the AR industry. I work in the immersive entertainment industry. And I don't care if it's a virtual reality headset or if it's an immersive projection, 3D projection system. I'm here to immerse the audience to the best of our ability within the digital, the synthetic environment. And VR at the moment is a clunky head mount on your bonce, and then hopefully in 5 years' time it'll be a snazzy pair of glasses, and in a couple more years it'll be maybe contact lenses that we slap in our faces. Yeah. It's not the point. It's the narrative. It's the quality of the experience. And to really get to the nub of the question you're asking us is, we wrap the audience in as much of the experience. We wrap the player in as much as the experience. And what you see with something like The Void and their Ghostbuster experiences, you're in just 3 rooms of the Ghostbusters universe, and the characters come through. But it's paced and it's controlled in such a way that the audience gets their bang for their buck, the 2, the 3 players that are going through. And that's really the narrative point of view that we need to always be mindful of. What are we trying to do for the user, the player? And I'm sorry, I don't really treat 360 video as VR unless it's positionally tracked.
Okay.
Before we go on that tangent, I think it's the lenses. It's just a different lens to look at that particular world.
Of course.
Whether it's game or film being moved to games, for instance. In a film you do a cut to get the character from the bottom of a cliff to the top. In a game you have to climb that ladder to get to the top of it, or climb the cliff. Yeah. And it's similar with immersive worlds in VR.
So here's the thing I want to pick up on, though, from what Kevin was saying, and it's an important point because a lot of people forget this, which is that VR does not mean HMD.
No.
Everybody who kind of comes to the industry new just assumes it means headsets, and you have to put a headset on somebody's head in order for them to actually be immersed in VR, and that's just not true. And in fact, Resh can speak to this point with, I'm going to get it wrong, Lockheed Martin?
Yes.
There we go,
right,
Lockheed Martin Bus to Mars, which was a social, shared, immersive experience without the need for everybody in that bus to actually have a headset on. Show of hands who's seen the Bus to Mars? I know you have.
No. Few people.
Okay, Resh, would you like to give some context as to Bus to Mars and then explain?
Yeah, sure. I mean, all the time. I mean, we work with brands very closely, and just speaking to what Kevin was saying, and often they'll approach us and say, look, we have this IP, and these are some IPs that I've grown up knowing and playing with. And I've tried the Ghostbusters experience, the Void experience, and it blew my mind. Albeit it was 3 minutes of being in only 3 rooms. It was worth every penny, because I played Ghostbusters when I was a kid on a Commodore 64. I played Ghostbusters on every single console you can imagine. I watched every single movie, and I made my own proto pack with my gun machine. And I became a Ghostbuster for real in VR with my kids and my husband. It was like, my mind was blown on so many levels, and that's what VR does. VR takes you and your IP and your story to a whole different level. It's just another tool. It's a tool to tell stories. It's a tool to make you cry, to make you fear, to make you feel like whether you're playing a game, whether you're listening, whether you're in a 360 experience, or whether you're on a bus feeling like you're going to a school trip, but suddenly it's the screens switch and you're on Mars. It's taking you somewhere where you never imagined possible. And that is what VR does. And good VR is an experience that is unforgettable. Whether that's 360, whether that's on a VR ride, whether that's you're playing a game. Anyone on the panel here, if you said to them, tell me the best thing that you've done in the past 4 years of making VR, and you'll speak of these experiences, why are we telling you about these ones? Because they made you feel something. They evoke and connect with you in a way that watching, Netflix on my phone doesn't quite do it. Watching a movie is still awesome and powerful, and it always will be, but it's not the same as being present. It's not the same as having control of that world. And when we did the field trip to Mars experience, the challenge very much was everyone thinks VR is an isolating experience, and we said, it's absolutely not. It's not. The bus itself is your HMD. Yeah. And when those kids stepped on that bus, the idea was very simple, is how do you inspire 9-year-olds to think about Mars? Because they will be the ones, when they grow up, that will eventually get to Mars. So that's quite a profound experience, that sitting on that bus, when they got off it, they were like, if we could actually go. We couldn't go in our lifetime. We will never be able to go, damn. But these 9-year-olds can. So it inspired them to become astronauts. And that's the power of, a provocative VR experience. And the fact that they were touching the screen and they were like, oh my God, it felt real because we mapped the streets of Washington in real time to the surface of Mars. So when they were 30 miles an hour on the streets of Washington, it felt like they were going 30 miles an hour on Mars. Every bump, every glitch on the road was mimicked in the experience. And for us, that's all we're trying to do. We're trying to create experiences that are unforgettable for people.
There's a term in the theme park industry that we like to use, which is experiential. So the reason why Main Street USA at Disney is created the way it is, it's false perspective. It's created so you see the castle at the right angle. It's a trick. It's an illusion. And experiential, good VR should be experiential.
Yeah. You just ruined Disneyland for everybody now. Just saying.
Sorry.
But I'm really interested to hear from your perspective, Tom, in terms of this idea of creating the environment in the world, narratively, the storytelling world that we're exploring. Obviously, from an opera perspective, there's this interesting idea of being able to see beyond the scene as it would normally be presented in that format. And from your perspective, exploring these immersive formats, is this something that you have had experience with in terms of creating the expanded environment or the expanded world from those scenes?
So traditionally, no, it's not something that opera and ballet do. We operate in the proscenium arch, and everything is behind that arch. I think where it's got really exciting is where companies such as Punch Drunk, Cirque du Soleil, etc., start to actually say, well, this is stupid. You came up with this proscenium arch in the 1700s, and actually you could do it in a whole manner of different ways. And our choreographers and directors, sort of in the last 30 years, have been really struggling with the fact that they have to operate in this theatre, this building that can only work in one way. And so we've been able to do some things where we've gone out to the Roundhouse in North London and done stuff in the Round, which is fantastic. But we see this potential of VR to actually give our artists, give our creatives a palette of tools that his row would never have had the opportunity to play with, coupling them with amazing storytellers from the gaming world, from the VFX world, who are great at non-linear narratives, and just seeing where that lands, and having a bit of fun with it and taking some big risks.
Okay, so I'm aware that we probably have about 1 minute-ish left. And we didn't get to the last two, so I'm just going to really quickly flick to those screens so that you can at least see what was on them. But we're not going to talk about them. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to throw it open to questions. So, at this point in time, bearing in mind the vast buffet of expertise, I am saying that word, of specialism that we have on this stage, are there any questions? Seriously?
That's the spirit. Yes.
It's because we're holding them back from their Easter weekend. They don't care.
You know what? I'd like to ask you guys a question.
Ooh.
Just that I'm curious to take a temperature of the room. Some of this may be a stupid question to ask. Who here has tried a Vive? Who here has not tried a Vive? Who here has met another human being inside VR? That's interesting. Who has not met another human being inside VR? Oh, you guys are in for a
Tom,
treat.
we have to change this. Tom, we're changing this for you.
That's super interesting, because I think that was just to support a little bit what we were talking about, how sociable VR is. I mean, in games, we've been doing this for 20 years, hanging out with people in a place that doesn't exist. Yeah. It is, once you've got over the sort of thrill of being immersed somewhere, that is the next thing that will blow your mind. Is
to your and Resh's point, is that being with other people in that space makes more memories. You watch a film, it's great while you're watching it, but at the end of it, you kind of go away and you carry on with your life. But in games and MMOs, for instance, you build those moments with other people, and that's what makes those memories.
You've got to understand that most out-of-home entertainment experiences are done with groups or individuals. Yeah. Families go to theme parks, groups go to theme parks. We can't make virtual reality or immersive entertainment just you on your own in a darkened environment watching an experience. It has to be a group experience, please.
So, for instance, if you and I see, or if we all in this room see the same movie, we'll have different opinions about it, but that discussion will be relatively short-lived against the comparison of if you and I have different experiences of the same content. That means we got a real discussion happening here, because not only are we able to talk about the actual raw content itself, we're talking about our own experiences. We're telling what we call war stories.
Which is exactly what it's like when you watch an immersive theatre experience.
Yes.
And people
exactly right. And this was leading to the point I always make about narrative, is that at the moment we are still, and this is not to say these things don't work, but at the moment we're still bringing to bear the principles of filmic narrative to a medium that disagrees with it. And what I mean by that is, in film, the thing that film is best at is saying, look at this right now. Every time you see a shot, every time you see a cut, director is saying, look at this now. And that, of course, is the very worst thing that VR is good at. And beyond that, we're also used to seeing narrative in two raw forms. One is a straight line. A movie is 2 hours and someone learns something about themselves and that's it. Or you look at most games and it's what we call linear branching, left door, right door, upstairs, downstairs. But the thing that's so thrilling about virtual reality is that it can mimic reality.
Real life.
And so if we look at how narrative occurs in real life, as you and I are sitting here, you are the protagonist of your story, and we are just miserable supporting characters in that story. But in the exact same unit of time, well, I'm the protagonist of my story, and I'm sorry, but you're just a supporting character in that. But in the exact same unit of time, all the people in this room are all background characters in both of our stories, but in the exact same unit of time, we're background characters in all of theirs. And all of those narratives coexist, and they're all completely interdependent on each other.
So what I'm going to do, because I'm getting dirty looks from over here, I'm going to wrap on that. I'm going to say this, which is, if you're interested in what Rob is talking about, go check out the GDC talk that you did about spherical narrative. What I will say is this, is that the reason that we do these VR writers' rooms is because cross-industry learning is fundamental. Collaboration is fundamental to the future of the VR and immersive industries. So I strongly encourage you to get out there and find an industry that you haven't interacted with and have conversations with them. For today, I would like to thank your lovely panelists today. That is Kevin, Rob, Simon, Resh, Tom, and Kim, for joining us today and sharing of their expertise. Thank you very much for joining us.
Your seats please don't run away from your seats immediately. Very sadly, there's a hand up in the background over there. I can't work out what's going on. No. Yeah, no, sorry.
Yes,
we've definitely got to wrap it. It's been an amazing conference. You nicely wrapped up there. This, it's been one of the most kind of industry and discipline mixing conferences I've ever been to. Like the learning, the shared learning, the atmosphere has been amazing. And I was about to move enthusiastically into thanking people, but before I do that, a very quick note. If you're here, which I know all of you are, you've received an email from Dan, one of the main organisers, about the various social things going on tonight. Effectively, there's not one specific venue. Yeah, you can finally socialise, madam. There's not one specific venue, but rather many recommendations along King Street, which is pretty close to here, and check the email. There's maps, there's pictures, there's links. People are heading that way. So we must say the thanks. We have to say the thanks not just to these speakers, but to all of our speakers, all of our audience, especially the ones that earned brownie points by asking questions. We have to say a massive, massive thanks to the volunteers, because it really couldn't help without them. Woo! The various AV people and technical people and the Nevolution guys, the people, I've already done that. Just everyone that contributed to it, but particularly the crew at Opposable Games, and right at the top of the VRWC empire, Dan and wherever she is, Sarah, who they bring not yet. Come on, let's applaud them. Because they don't only bring an amazing VR conference and an amazing diversity of speakers and an amazing amount of expertise about what VR is, but they also bring the vibes. So big up those two. They really do. It's amazing what happens when you give some ravers a spreadsheet. But yeah, honestly, it's been absolutely amazing. I can't wait to see you all next year. I mean, Dan, maybe I've done 3 of these in a row. Maybe I finally screwed it, but I'll be here either on stage or in the audience. So yeah. Did I miss thanking anyone, Dan?
Sponsors?
Oh, the sponsors! Yeah, no, but it is serious. Like, there's some great companies that are really involved in the industry and make things like this happen. So I think that is it for VR World Congress 2017. Really sad because it's been amazing. Well done, everybody. We all made it happen.